Tēnā rā koutou katoa, aku mihi nui nei ki te tī ki te tā huri no I te ao, ko te tūmanako ia, kei te noho haumaru tonu te katoa. Welcome to this presentation titled Theorising Maori Health and Wellbeing, Voices from the Margins. This is an ethnographic collaboration with some tribal members of the local iwi Ngāti Kauwhata, situated in Fielding, Manawatu, Aotearoa, New Zealand. It is anchored in the cultural-centred approach with emphasis on the connection between land, local rivers, and health and wellbeing. The cultural-centred approach is a meta-theoretical framework designed by Professor Mohan Datta. It illuminates structural inequalities and foregrounds voice from communities who are positioned on the margins of societies. Communicative inequalities are interlinked with material inequalities, structural inequalities, socio-economic inequalities. As we all know, not all relationships are created equal. Therefore, not all relationships within communities are equal. Not all relationships within tribal nations are equal. The articulations of these lived experiences of inequalities, together with the co-creation of strategies and solutions by these communities, mark the CCA approach. As discussed by Professors Mohan Datta and Collins Ehibinbua, culture is both dynamic and static. Culture reflects the shared meanings of values, practices, and meanings. These can be passed down through the generations. They can also be transformed over time and in response to crises. Structure is about the systems of organising, complete with its rules about who can participate and who cannot, and how that participation should be conducted. Values also underpin structure. These are often hegemonic and ethnocentric in nature as they prop up neoliberal agendas. Agency is expressed through the daily navigation of structural constraints. So in the CCA, at the intersections of culture, structure, and agency, voices emerge that often call into question or interrogate the workings of structure whilst articulating cultural-centred meanings and reimaginings. Excuse me. This is the geographical area of Fielding, Manawatu, Aotearoa, New Zealand. On the right here, there is a map of New Zealand, and where the cursor is, if you can see it, yep, that's pretty much where the Manawatu is. And on the left, the green carved out area of the Manawatu includes Fielding, which is about 20 kilometres north of Palmerston North, which is the nearest city. Fielding is a part of the Ngāti Kauwhata tribal area. I am also a Ngāti Kauwhata tribal member, so in this collaboration I'm positioned as an insider-outsider researcher. Professor Linda Smith talks about this more, inside-outsider researchers within Indigenous nations. Insider because I belong to the local iwi of Ngāti Kauwhata, and outsider because I am at the university and have the privileges of this position and Western education. So, who are the margins of the margins? And in the context of tribal nations, I often get asked, aren't we all marginalised? So, this is because this question keeps being raised because as tribal nations, whānau who comprise tribal nations are related by genealogy. We can cite a common ancestor. In my iwi, we can go back up to around 8 generations to identify a common ancestor. And some of the larger iwis, they go beyond 8 generations to cite a common ancestor. So therefore this idea that framing and positioning whānau members as the margins of the margins is divisive and exclusionary in itself props up communicative inequalities. The simple facts are these. Some of us have greater access to information, resources and voice platforms than others. Therefore, we are not all positioned equal. This reality produces questions such as who has the power in our tribal nations? How is it reproduced to erase voice and maintain expert domination in our communities? Whose voices are not heard in mainstream and tribal discursive spaces? The CCA methodology looks deeper and wider for these types of erasures. For example, in this study, tribal leaders and or representatives on committees, be they in mainstream spaces or tribal spaces, are not participants. Apart from the consideration of socio-economic inequalities, I also looked at who is doing the representing and who is not. 30 whānau participants engaged in this study, most comprised the local iwi, Ngāti Kaupata. Other participants either have children who are Ngāti Kaupata tribal members or they have a spouse who is a tribal member. Their ages ranged between 18 to 70 years. In-depth interviews, in-depth open-ended questions that simply asked, what does health and wellbeing mean to you? How is land connected to health and wellbeing? As well as an array of other questions built infrastructures for listening and meaning making. This idea that whānau with lived realities of socio-economic and community inequalities are best represented by others within our tribal nations because these representatives are better positioned to raise issues on behalf of all really needs examining. The co-constructed meanings of health and wellbeing and the connection to land, rivers and the environment as articulated by whānau participants in phase 1 of the CCA research project provides alternative imaginaries for voice democracy. In phase 2, platforms for voice were co-created with participants. And during this stage, local government seized the few remaining acres of ancestral land to build a stock bank to prevent flooding in the community. To end this presentation, here is a video co-created by whānau as they occupied their land and called into question hegemonic local government consultative processes. I'm happy to engage in further dialogue or try to answer any questions as I see them. Thank you for joining and watching this video.
Since 1828, around those times, our tūpuna come down here. We took possession of this land on purpose because of this river over here, Orowa. By the time it come to the 1860s, Waikato land wars, Taranaki land wars, through to the 1880s, we went to court many times and we lost most of our land. It was given 11,000 acres between 5 chiefs. Of that 11,000 acres, today in 2020 we own probably under 50 acres.
When they pushed the people off the maraes with their great big urbanisation push and certain laws, people potted our people around in towns and that, so they couldn't be communal.
We don't have much left and they're still trying to take some off us.
Horizons never got permission from us, Te Ara o Rehua Trust, to go onto our land, which they have already done.
We at Ngāti Kaupata, we the landowners of this piece of land here, are going to fight.
Yeah, after losing so much land as an iwi and hapu, I feel it's time to stand and represent my aunties, my kuia, and the tamariki that are going to come. We don't have a lot, like I said, and not one more acre. There's been one of the Pākehā farmers, he's agreed to let us occupy some of his land too. He gave them permission to put the stop bank somewhere over there, but instead they've chosen to swallow up all this land and start their stop bank on Maori land. It's just a modern day form of confiscation, that's what it feels like.
We're going to be here, we're going to stay here until it's all finished and we'll get this taken back over towards the awa.